Hello, my name is David Pruitt, and today we're going to be taking a look at the book of Revelation and how it has been interpreted by the church throughout history. There are 5 general schools of thought on how to approach this book. There's the preterists, historicists, futurists, idealists, and eclectics. Each has a unique take on how to interpret the signs and symbols of the prophecies in this book. First, the preterists see the book of Revelation as being done. It's completed. Everything has already happened. They generally assign an early date to its writing so that all the prophecies are fulfilled in the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans in AD 70. The precedent for this is that John writes that the original audiences that generation will not pass before seeing these things complete. They also sort of take the book of Revelation as an elongated version of the Olivet Discourse, that of Jesus's explanation of the eschaton and the end of the Levitical and sacrificial systems. The great strength of this is it embraces the historicity of Israel's judgment within the first century and is historically verifiable that the specific signs and symbols can be assigned to that time period. The weakness of this is that there is no need for current studies of the book, as all of the prophecies have already been fulfilled. They also generally completely disregard the importance of the parousia, the second coming of Christ, and have no explanation for why evil has persisted if Christ has been victorious already since AD 70. Next, we have the historicists, who see the fulfillment of prophecies throughout church history and can assign the different symbols to different time periods. This was generally the thought of the Protestant reformers who were seeing the tribulation times as the 1,000 years of the Roman or European papacy's influence on the church. They generally viewed that as the evil that was promised by John. The way that they can do this is that they equate the days in Revelation to literal years. As we know, the day unto the Lord is like 1,000 years. And so the 1,260 days of tribulation promised by John would equate to 1,260 years. The problem with this is that there is no clear beginning or end of when this time period actually should be, especially when we weigh it up against the Roman and European papacy arguments, because it completely disregards the church throughout the rest of the world. But a great strength of this type of theology is that it allows every generation to sort of expect the events that unfold in Revelation to happen in their time and can assign it to different time periods and different catastrophes that are happening. The futurists, on the other hand, see the fulfillment of prophecy as still being in the future. They take a very literal approach to all of the signs and symbols in Revelation. Their focus is on the ultimate victory of Christ, which obviously has not happened yet. The problem is that they completely disregard the apocalyptic nature of the book and see only prophecy instead of more apocalyptic interpretation of signs and symbols meaning different things. A great strength, though, is that they distinguish the prophecies that are given to Israel from those that are given to the church, and can distinguish the church being raptured from the tribulation that is going to happen to Israel. So what the futurists really do is they do not over-spiritualize anything. They don't allegorize the book, but they see everything at face value. The problem is they can't see beyond what is the words that are just written down and interpret them too literally sometimes. For the idealists, there isn't really prophecy or apocalypse to the book. Instead, they see a more allegorized epistle, basically, that is used to encourage the church in all time periods and in all circumstances by focusing on the perpetual battle between good and evil, between God and Satan, between Christian and anti-Christian forces. Unfortunately, because of this, they misappropriate the distinction between Israel and the church and sort of take a replacement type theology approach to the prophecies given. A strength of this ideology is that it views Revelation as a whole, complete work of art. It is one solid book. It isn't segmented into different time periods or what have you. It also discourages from arbitrarily assigning meanings of symbols to certain events throughout history. The problem with allegorizing anything, though, is that anything can mean anything, which as a result means nothing. So, for instance, the harlot on the beast could mean anything. It could be apostasy of the church throughout history. It could be the Roman Empire. It could be the Nazis. It could literally mean anything, which in turn means that there is no value for anyone looking at it today. The final viewpoint is the eclectics, who sort of take an amalgamation of the other four perspectives to try and alleviate some of those tensions of dating, the symbols, fulfillment, all those sorts of things. For instance, we can see that there are already agreements between the different viewpoints. For instance, idealism agrees with the historicity of John's writing to the churches in the first century, while also embracing the limitlessness of those symbols throughout time, and that they need a future completion fulfillment. Eclectics like to take a already but not yet type theology, where they interpret the fulfillment as already happening partially, but that it still needs to be completely, fully finished in the future. We even sort of see this in John's writing of the book, that he sees certain events as happening in his time for the church then, but that there is still future things that need to take place. A strength of this is that it allows the interpreter to pick and choose the best parts of the other ideologies and sort of meld them together to give the best representation of what could possibly happen. The problem is that since they sort of walk the fence and don't pick one side or the other, there's no succinct conclusions to be drawn from any of the symbols or allusions in the book. Some other important methodologies and terminologies within these schools of thought are the terms allegory, gematria, millennialism, tribulation, and dispensationalism. Allegory is the focus on symbols and archetypes throughout the book. For instance, the lamb that was slain is obviously an archetype for Christ. And so some of the schools of thought take that and focus on that instead of like the 7 churches, the letters in chapters 2 and 3 being to literal churches. They are symbolic churches. Gematria is the Jewish numerology, which focuses on numbers, colors, sounds, sort of as representations for specific things. For example, the number 7 is the number of completion. The color white is supposed to symbolize peace and harmony, these sorts of things. And in all of these schools of thought, there's either one leaning towards literalization or dramatization. Either they take everything at face value, in that they are literal things that are going to happen, or they over-dramatize it. A good example would be the Left Behind series, which takes these and turns it into this epic novel and assigns, certain symbols to things that may or may not happen. But in all of that, all of the schools of thought will take a stance on the millennial reign of Christ, the 1,000-year reigns, either A, pre, or post-millennialism. Amillennialism is the notion that there is no actual 1,000-year reign, but that it's more figurative language. Pre is that the millennial reign will happen before Christ's second coming and is typically seen as the church living out that 1,000-year reign. Postmillennialism is the notion that the parousia will happen and then Christ will reign for 1,000 years. Added to this argument is when the church is going to be raptured, either pre, mid, or post-tribulation. The thought is either the church will be rescued from all the calamities, or that in the middle of it they will be rescued, or that they'll have to suffer through all of the plagues and the bowls and the trumpets and all that, and then go to heaven and then reign with Christ. Also, there is a term called dispensationalism, which is focused on the fulfillment of prophecies in specific time periods or dispensations. And there's generally two views. There's the classical or the progressive, where the classical is the early church fathers who saw all the prophecies as being needing fulfillment in the future, that they haven't happened yet, that they're still to come. Whereas the progressive is more that already but not yet, seeing fulfillment of prophecies happening maybe in part throughout different time periods of history and that sort of thing. So what are we supposed to take away from all this? Which of these 5 schools of thought is the best one? Which one should we follow? Well, first we must recognize that the complexity of the book of Revelation demands no single view be held. I am of the opinion that any good interpreter is going to shift their views between these different schools of thoughts throughout their lifetime. And we must also recognize that Jesus himself told us that no one knows when these things are going to happen. Nobody knows when all this is going to be wrapped up. So we shouldn't squabble over speculations of what is right, what is wrong, who has the best ideas, but rather we should come together in unity and try and help each other sort of interpret the ambiguity of this book. John's purpose in writing the book of Revelation was to give hope to Christians both in the past and now, that we should wait patiently and joyfully, not anxiously and fearfully. Because unfortunately there have been some interpreters throughout history who have used this book to instill fear in people of the coming judgment, to make people anxious about all the tribulation that is said to happen. But we must remember the steadfast nature of God's promises and that he always finishes what he began. So if he said he's going to do it, he will do it. The big takeaway then is to be ready, to look at the book of Revelation, see the things that are presented, and anticipate them, and be ready when they do actually happen. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this inspires you to dig into these 5 schools of interpretation, to glean what you can from them, and to dig deeper into the book of Revelation to see the joy that the Lord is trying to give to us. Thank you so much, and have a blessed day.